Hello and welcome to Mindset Mondays with DTK. This is episode 57, and what was initially supposed to be a year-long program, this is now an ongoing series of conversations for folk with a growth mindset or those who'd like to develop one. The playground is new ideas, new concepts, and trying on new mindsets. So here's the deal. If you will take just a moment and click share underneath your video, invite your friends, your community, your colleagues to join the conversation. The more folks we have in the playground, the better the conversation. And so today, the playground it's kind of fun to do the impossible. So this is a great quote from Walt Disney. And yes, there's fabulous stories about Walt Disney and all the fits and starts that his career overcame. And although he's a great example, and this is his quote, I think for me, it's interesting. I shared in the email lead-in for this that, nearly 30 years as a serial entrepreneur, it's amazing how many times I've looked at things and said, no, that's impossible, not going to do it. And where I literally leaned into the fear instead of leaning into the possibility and just said, nah, impossible, not going to do it. And it's incredible how many times on the flip side, I didn't even pay attention to the possibility or impossibility of it. I just leapt headlong without thinking. And there's lost opportunity in both of those ways of approaching the world. I think for me, there's the missed opportunity of saying it's impossible and not playing. And then there's the even leaning in without even paying attention to the possibility, let alone the impossibility, that I missed the opportunity to be present and to enjoy it and to have that fun that comes from doing the impossible, going unconsciously or stopping before diving in, both have a tremendous amount of loss. I think the other piece that came up for me about this quote was, what are our personal impossibilities? What are the things that are not on the scale of Walt Disney saying, having this vision for a never before done massive scale amusement park? What about the small things? I'm a little immersed in the book that goes with Mindset Mondays right now. So I look at that as an entry point to the example of my getting a book out feels like a personal impossibility for me. Just the volume of detail to be managed and the persistent focus over a long period of time, those all feel like ingredients in the recipe for impossible for me. And so that seems like a personal impossibility. And right now for me, it's become about leaning back into 4-hour work week. Tim Ferriss leaning into his question of what would it look like if it were easy? Surrounding myself with the folk that can make the impossible possible. And I remember during a conversation recently, Rich Litvin had reflected back another way to look at surmounting the impossible. We all have experiences in our world where we've done this seemingly impossible without considering any other option. Take it all the way back as infants. Without the benefit of conscious awareness and the ability to communicate in language, we've acquired speech. We've learned how to speak to those around us with no experience with it whatsoever, just from hearing and playing with and babbling, we acquired speech. And on the same, we learned how to walk when we were born with very little control over our limbs. And it seems silly to take it back all the way to that. But then, yet again, we have brilliant examples of doing what seemed impossible with insurmountable lack of skill or awareness. So where else have you done the seemingly impossible? Where else have you come out of ideas out of nowhere and created something that seems to be an impossibility? Look, our first attempt at having children, we lost a pregnancy, or Elaine lost a pregnancy. We lost the opportunity for a child at 21 weeks into the pregnancy. It seemed impossible that we would get beyond that. That was the first shot at having kids. And it was devastating. And it seemed impossible to comprehend the loss, and then impossible to comprehend moving forward. And yet, clearly, we did. We got beyond that personal impossibility, that perceived or constructed impossibility. Where do you have things in your world where you see them as impossible, yet you've plowed forward anyway? Where have you made up impossibility? You know, I think so often what we perceive to be impossible is just our comparing our beginning to somebody else's middle. There were electric vehicles on the market already, and yet Elon Musk looked and didn't say it's impossible to bring a better electric car onto the market. He didn't say it's impossible to bring a car to market. There are many before him who have looked at the space as an independent, potential being independent car manufacturer and said, oh, hell no, that's impossible. What do you call it? Irrational exuberance or blind confidence? He chose to look at what seemed to be a market impossibility and created it. We compare our beginning to somebody else's middle. Many of you have heard me say this before. That's just a form of self-abuse. What happens to Roy Disney's other quotes? If you can dream it, you can do it. Or all of our dreams can come true if we have the courage to pursue them. Or Mandela, his line, and again, it's attributed to Mandela. I'm going to assume that's accurate. He said, it only seems impossible until you do it. Beth Cooper and I launched an internet strategy and web development company in 1995. Neither of us knew how to code when we sold the first website. Did it seem impossible? I wonder if we even paid attention to whether it was possible or not. Well, we just did it. I have another quote I enjoy, which is sort of fitting here. It's Captain Hepburn, nothing is impossible. The word itself says, I'm possible. The word itself says, I'm possible. What if things weren't an impossibility? What if it was as simple as, I'm possible? What if it were that simple? It's kind of fun to do the impossible. You know, the question that came up for me is, what's the fun in sitting still? What's the fun in stagnating? What's the fun into giving over to impossibility and not moving forward? There's not. So for this week, what's the possibility for you? What can you look at that you've been tagging as impossible and decide to look beyond that made-up tag of impossible? What's the opportunity for you to look forward and create something? Where have you been making up the label that something's impossible and choosing to sit still, choosing to accept the same, choosing to slowly stagnate? I have a long history of looking at things as an impossibility, and there is a depressing edge to leaning into impossibility. Right? The perpetual sameness. And as a coach, we live in the place of possibility. And yet, how often have I heard myself and other coaches say, no, we can't do that. When Elaine and Diane, my wife Elaine and Diane Dempster, looked at how to serve a market they were desperate to find a way to serve, parents and kids with complex needs. And it's easy to say, no, it's impossible to come up with a model that could support the life that Diane and Elaine want and still support that client base. 7 years later, they've got folk using their website about a brand new website that just launched in over 130 countries. They've got licensees. They've got some 50, 60 licensees scattered on 4 continents. So to look 7 years ago, to look forward and say, what can we create? What they have now would have seemed impossible to their rational minds 7 years ago. There's nothing that we can't create. Everything that we create in the world is created first here. If you can dream it, you can do it. The question is, what are you willing to allow yourself to dream? What are you willing to believe is possible instead of impossible? So the playground this week is to look at what impossibility will you hold as possible? What is it that you've been seeing as impossible, pretending is impossible? What impossibility will you choose to make possible? So I'd love you to share more of that. Come to facebook.com/groups/Mindset Monday and share the impossibility that you will choose to make possible. Would love to hear what you want to create in the world. And between now and next week, what mindset will you choose?